More and more Americans are asking a critical question. What can I do to defend democracy in America? That question marks a shift away from the comforting illusion that courts, politicians, or institutions will save America's democracy on their own. They won't. Institutions have failed us repeatedly, as we've learned that what we thought were guardrails are merely suggestions reliant on goodwill, decency, and the honor system. Real political change in America doesn't come from the top. It never has. It comes from the bottom. Ordinary people resisting in big and small ways. That's the legacy of the civil rights movement. The political scientist Gene Sharp, nicknamed the Dictator Slayer, wrote something of a playbook for resisting authoritarian regimes. He didn't invent these strategies. He observed them. For decades, Sharp studied how ordinary people challenged brutal regimes around the world. And what he found was simple yet powerful. All rulers, even the most oppressive, rely on the cooperation of their people. Through fear, apathy, or consent, they maintain power. But when people refuse to cooperate, when they disobey, authoritarian systems begin to crack. That's why historian Timothy Snyder begins his book titled On Tyranny with this warning: do not obey in advance. Because it's in those first, often invisible acts of surrender that authoritarianism takes root. Now, as we face creeping authoritarianism here at home, Snyder's advice stands as a call to action for Americans confronting Trump and the rise of oligarchic rule. What happens when ordinary people act? History shows that the courage to stand up to authority and to hold power to account has helped to sustain our democracy for generations and other democracies around the world. The historian and former president of Harvard, Drew Gilpin Faust, captured that spirit in a powerful essay about the Union soldiers of the Civil War. She wrote, quote, "I have read dozens of these men's letters and diaries, windows into what and whom they loved and what they hoped for at the end of a war they knew they might not survive. Together, they did save the Union. These men made our lives possible. They were impelled to risk all by a sense of obligation to the future. We possess a reciprocal obligation to the past. We must not squander what they bequeathed to us," end quote. We owe it to them. And to every generation that came after them, those women who won the right to vote, those students who walked into newly desegregated schools under armed guard, those trade unionists who faced violence for fighting for the rights of workers, those who fought for voting rights, reproductive freedom, LGBTQ plus dignity. They did not wait for permission. They disobeyed in advance. They withdrew their cooperation from injustice. Oftentimes, they blatantly and openly broke the law as TV cameras rolled, which brings us back to Gene Sharp's basic premise. It's a very Gandhian premise. He believed that non-cooperation, the deliberate refusal to obey or comply, is one of the most powerful ways to disrupt oppressive systems. Because when enough people stop participating in the machinery of control, the very system begins to break down. So, if you're wondering what you can do, here are some ideas that draw from proven strategies of resistance adapted for today's world. One tactic is to overload the administrative systems. In Missouri, a government-run tip line targeting the trans community was flooded with thousands of fake reports, including the entire movie script of the B movie, submitted over and over again. The result? Total system collapse. Utah and Texas face similar backlashes, with Utah shutting down its own surveillance hotline under the weight of memes and mass trolling. Another tactic is civil disobedience of illegitimate laws. This, of course, is what undergirded the civil rights movement in America. But here's a more recent example. In Idaho, a middle school teacher refused to remove a sign that said, "Everyone is welcome here." That's all it said. Didn't mention politics or gender. It was just deemed to be too controversial. After a months-long battle, she resigned 2 weeks ago in protest, writing in part, "I cannot align myself nor be complicit with the exclusionary views and decisions of this administration. It is deeply troubling that the people running this district and school have allowed a welcoming and inclusive message for my students to be considered controversial, political, and worst of all, an opinion," end quote. Then there's political non-cooperation, which can include using the opposition's own tools against them. In 2024, Oklahoma's Republican-controlled legislature passed a law allowing parents to opt their children out of, quote, harmful education material. Now a group of parents has turned that law on its head in response to State Superintendent Ryan Walter's new curriculum, which includes conspiracy theories about the 2020 election and Christian national ideology. A parents group called We're Oklahoma Education, the acronym for that, by the way, is WOKE, is fighting back. They've created an opt-out form allowing families to withdraw their children from lessons on Judeo-Christian concepts of ethics and government and discrepancies in 2020 election results. Parents can also prohibit their children from any exposure to Walters himself, including his cringy video messages. Their approach is not only bold, but legally savvy. The group is using the very law that conservatives passed that was designed to shield students from so-called progressive content. The opt-out letter warns schools that failure to comply could result in legal action. Then, and this is one that's close to my heart, there's economic non-cooperation. When Target pulled Pride merchandise and scaled back diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments, thousands of Americans launched a boycott campaign on TikTok, Facebook, and other platforms. The result? Target's quarterly profits dropped, and the company admitted that backlash from both sides had harmed its bottom line. These efforts show how economic disruption can force big business and powerful institutions to feel the cost of discriminatory decisions. And then there's what's known as nonviolent interjection. As an example, during the Muslim ban in the first Trump administration, immigration attorneys organized within hours coordinating airport defense through encrypted chats and social media. More recently, in Worcester, Massachusetts, viral footage of an aggressive ICE raid showed federal agents detaining a woman as her daughters clung to a car, one holding a baby. Bystanders, including a city councilor and a school board candidate, intervened. The video sparked immediate outrage, protests across the state. In response, Worcester officials released body cam footage and then took action. The city issued an executive order barring city employees from cooperating with ICE or inquiring about immigration status. Which brings us to the final and perhaps my favorite form of disruption, humor. The civil rights activist Bruce Hartford noted that humor and audacity go hand in hand. You can weaken, unbalance, and ultimately overthrow the king quicker by laughing at him than by futilely screaming fury at him, end quote. Groups like the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster and the Satanic Temple have used satire to expose religious favoritism in public institutions. The Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, whose adherents refer to themselves as Pastafarians, mocked efforts to teach intelligent design in public schools by proposing a noodle-based deity, their own noodle-based deity, highlighting the dangers of blurring church and state. The Satanic Temple took similar action, demanding equal representation when governments promoted Christian symbols like the Ten Commandments monuments or sanctioned prayer in public schools. Their logic forced officials to either accommodate all religions or retract their policies altogether. So if you're asking yourself what one person can do, these are just some starters. These are ideas to hopefully get you thinking. And remember this final piece of advice from the historian Timothy Snyder, quote, "Be as courageous as you can. If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny," end quote.